So, in all likelihood, this is going to be the first in a bit of a series. So, we're finally getting to talk about talismans. I am Dave the Amateur Magus. On this channel I talk all about the mechanics behind ceremonial magic, occultism, esotericism, and the mechanics behind everything you can find within a dusty old grimoire. On today's episode we are finally talking about talismans, their construction, and what goes into making them, and charging them. If you enjoy what I do here and you want to support the channel, link in the description to the Patreon where you can get exclusive access to content early, Patreon exclusive videos, and the Occultic Manual series, which is a monthly write-up that is more advanced than what I have here on the channel, but less advanced than what you would find in one of those dusty old grimoires that I like to talk about on the channel. If that sounds interesting to you, link in the Patreon description where you can go over and subscribe, and if you're already supporting me on Patreon, you have my thanks for your continued and ongoing support. And just as a reminder, I am still booking astrology readings and various consultations about the occult via email. That is in the description as well if you are interested, or you can reach out to me on social media. Talismans in the Renaissance were the go-to method for thaumaturgy. That was, if you wanted to make a physical change in the physical world, you would not do a prayer and call up a spirit. You would make a physical object to do that for you. You would make a talisman for good health, money, making sure the crops would grow, that kind of thing. And I am happy and sad to say that for the most part, the reasons you would use talismans in the modern day are pretty much exactly the same as why you would use them in the past. Money, love, health, etc. So what all goes into making a talisman? Now, I'm going to start by saying there are no correct ways of making a talisman. Yes, you have heard me correctly. There is no single one-size-fits-all method of making a talisman for every single need. And you can't just put yes, because that would also include horrible things. So we actually have to get a little bit more specific. Now, it would be absolutely impossible for me to go over every single form of talismanic construction. There's just way too many. You could make talismans out of herbs and a piece of cloth you found, well, not found, but maybe found. You could get a piece of cloth filled with herbs and turn that into a little satchel bag, and if that is properly constructed, that could work as a talisman if you had the proper training, which I don't. You could use various different types of stone. You could carve a crystal. You could take a crystal structure, use a rock saw, or various different other types of methods of shaping it. You can draw the sigils on there, maybe add some paint if you felt so inclined, and you could use that and consecrate it, and that would work as a talisman, which I do have some experience with. Or you could do what a lot of ancient individuals used to do, which was you would take metal plates, because metal was fairly easy to work with in the antiquities. You could take a metal piece of plate, you could shape it, you could inscribe the various different things onto it, and that is the method given in a lot of old grimoires, most notably the Greater Key of Solomon. And to those wondering, I am outright calling the pentacles in the Greater Key of Solomon talismans, because they don't actually do... They do a lot of talismanic things. Some of them are so that no weapons would prosper against you, for God's sakes. If that's not a talisman to make you win at war, I don't know what is. Now, all talismans will have this one thing in common. They are to manifest the spiritual energies that you are looking for down into your life. And that is going to happen, and that is going to be a repeated theme throughout every single talisman that you may or may not make, because that's just how that works. Now, what the symbolism of that talisman is going to be very different. Norse runes can be used to inscribe various different powers onto various different objects. One of my favorite stories is, as an experiment, somebody took the Norse rune of fire, inscribed it onto a dead Bic lighter, and the fire of the lighter worked better for It had no oil in it anymore. It had no gas. It was supposed to be dead, and then all of a sudden it has bigger flames than it has ever had, despite the fact that it is a dead lighter. So this dead lighter got resurrected, at least for like a couple weeks. My understanding is that the more he used it, the more he smudged the rune, and then after the rune was gone, it never worked again. So this should tell you a little bit about talismans. That story in and of itself. If the item is appropriate for what you are trying to use it for, it will be more powerful. This is why in the old grimoires you could make the argument, that I'm not going to make here because that is a whole other can of worms, that if you are inscribing words that are for making a thing a weapon to protect you from all demons, you should probably be inscribing that upon a sword, because symbolically a sword is going to be better than, say, a cup to defend you. So the thing that you are inscribing upon should be appropriate. But this is not a conversation about magical tools, this is a conversation about talismans. So what are the most common forms of talismans going to be? I highly recommend, if you are not the kind of person who enjoys herb craft and herbology, you pick up some metal discs, some metal blanks, some coins, for instance, of various different types of easily carvable metals. Easily carvable means not steel or iron. I'm going to tell you this from experience. Those are not exactly easy to do. And what you can do is, if you have a proper gas mask and ventilation, you can carve those, and you could also theoretically use water on them, but, you know, if you are practicing proper PPE, personal protective equipment, and proper safety, you can carve whatever symbols you want into these different talismans, and you can use those. Now, they're not going to be very strong when you first start using them, and the reason for this is because you have not consecrated them. Now, consecration is a topic for an entire another video, but here is the long and the short of it. The way you're going to want to do things is you are going to want to take your talisman, and you're going to want to put it on whatever altar surface you're using. If you're using a side table, that's fine. Put it on the side table, but just make sure it's in reach. You're going to do your rituals. You're going to cast the circle. You're going to begin by doing whatever preliminaries you so incline. So whatever those may be, you're going to use those. Now, I'm going to give a full example of a talisman at the end and various different preparations. Now, after you've done this, you're going to go ahead and you're going to you're going to figure out what you want to do, and you're going to figure out what you want this talisman to be beforehand, and you're going to inscribe upon it all of the various different things you think. Now, if you have a coin or something that has two sides, you can flip both sides and write something on both sides if you feel so inclined. Now, there should be a front. I will say that. There should be a front. If you're putting things on the back, the things on the back should be less detailed, or they should be kind of a invoking the power sort of thing, but there should be a very clear and understandable reason why it's a talisman on the front of the talisman, if you are working with this metal talisman construction. For other talisman construction methods, please consult other sources. I'm just talking about what I do for my metal talismans at the moment. So, it should be noted that if you are making a talisman from scratch, that is to say, completely on your own, from scratch, you should make sure that you do tarot and divination to make sure that you are making the talisman do what you want it to do. Especially if you are inscribing spirit names onto your talismans, which that is a whole nother thing. And that is a whole another can of worms that we are going to not talk about. So, let's walk through a method of talisman construction that I have personally done. So, this was an attempt at a talisman. This was an attempt to create my own custom talisman, and this was when I was kind of honestly bored. The reason I was bored is because I wanted to do some experiments with Talismanic Magick, because the only Talismanic Magick I had really done was the Talismanic Magick from the Greater Key, and I wanted to expand my understanding of Talismanic Magick and refine some of my basic assumptions and basic abilities when it comes to talismans as well as engraving metals in and of itself. So, well, the first thing I did before anything was I came up with what would become the basic layout for how I would do the talisman. Now, what I had on this talisman was I had the different sigils for two of the planetary spirits that would be worked with in the consecration of this talisman. Those being the planetary intelligence and the planetary daimon. So these are both from Agrippa. And I had these on the same talisman, and I also I also drew out the planetary symbol for the planetary that was primarily associated with this, as well as the zodiac sign for the zodiac sign that was primarily associated with this. On top of this, I also drew the letter for the different spirits in different fonts of Hebrew. So for those of you who don't know, the planetaries and the zodiacal signs, as well as the elements, but most of the elements, have a Hebrew letter that is associated, and I wrote these down with various different forms of fonts, so I was trying to stack as many correspondences as possible. I then proceeded to write in Greek different words that corresponded to the different things that I was trying to get. So if you were trying to go for money, you would try to write money, wealth, affluence, that kind of thing. But I then proceeded to tarot how this would go, and I basically got, yeah, it will work very well. I then proceeded to, on the back, you remember how I said that was there needs to be a front and a back for these metal talismans. The front face, that is all of what I have just described. On the back, I drew a kind of, if you're familiar with the pentacles of Solomon, this was a pentacle style on the back where I wrote the god name Ararita, which was correspondent to the goal that I was trying to make, as well as put various different geometric figures on the center, which were correspondent to the goal as well. Now, this was just in the talisman construction. For the actual consecration, what you would want to do is you would want to do preliminaries, evoke the necessary spirits, and all of that. So you would plan it for the proper day. So if you are caring about the full astrology, you would plan a proper day to do the full consecration in its totality, and you would plan the full ritual then. If you are just trying to do this as a bit of an experiment, because one of the things that you can do about metal talismans is you can theoretically reconsecrate them at a more appropriate astrological election, what you would do is you would do your prep. So in my case, if I'm doing a Golden Dawn style method, I would do the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, I would do the lesser invoking ritual of the hexagram, and then I would invoke the planetary power associated with the talisman. If I'm doing money, probably Jupiter. If I'm doing Venus, I would do Venus. Saturn, you get the idea. Now, you would also, in my case, for the talisman, I mentioned the intelligence and the daimon of the planetary in question. So I would go to my copy of Agrippa, and then I would get the names of those spirits as well as their sigils, and I would call up and I would evoke those spirits. I would evoke the intelligence first, as you are always supposed to invoke the intelligence first in this kind of magical operation, and then I would evoke the daimon second. Now, the reason you do this is because the intelligence of the spirit is said to be the celestial, higher-minded, and good aspects of the planetary, but the daimon is the evil, more negative aspects. Now, the reason why that you would evoke the evil version at all is because they're the more physical of the spirit. They are closer to the earth, but you need the authority of the intelligence to get them to do what you want. So you are effectively calling their boss to make sure that they do what you want and you don't have any problems. Now, the final thing I would recommend is you would have incense and you would have proper everything, and you would ask them to consecrate the spirit along with any other spirits you might have named, and you would meditate and you would attempt to breathe life into the talisman itself. You would vibrate all of the different god names and all of the different things on it, as well as do a prayer to fully charge the energy of the talisman. Now, I will say that some people are better at talismans than others. In my experience, I find that talismans are very, very potent if done correctly, and completely useless if done poorly. If you are going to make a talisman, and you're going to half-ass it, I highly recommend you go into your Greater Key of Solomon, and you research the Greater Key of Solomon. In the Greater Key of Solomon, there is a method for consecrating paper. You can use a method of consecrating a piece of paper, and that will allow you to consecrate the talisman in a bit of a more lax way. And when I say lax, I don't mean half-ass, I mean you don't need to get an entire brass and metalworking setup in order to make one talisman that might not even work because you're trying it for the first time. In my experience, the talismans of the Greater Key usually work fairly well off the bat if you are consecrating everything the proper ways, but if you are not, I would highly recommend you do some form of paper consecration for any talismans you are constructing. You can also use custom-made sigils, like if you have a Chaos Magic sigil, you can use that in your in your talismans as well, but this is just a little bit of notes and observations I would like to make. There are entire books about talismans, as well as different sections in much more well-respected authors and occultists' opinions about talismans and various different forms of magical construction that you would want to read instead of just taking my word for it. So I highly recommend, if you are going to use talismans, you do a lot of research, and at least when you're starting out and you are in the beginning stages of your practice, do not try to make your own. Please use the ones that are attested to in the grimoires and or in various different books that you may purchase. If you are working out of a book, you should always do things that are by the book that you are working out of, because the author has put those instructions there for a reason. So, with that being said, I have been Dave the Amateur Magus. Hope everyone is having a good day. If you're not having a good day, hope your day gets better. Take it easy, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.